Kaur, Minister of External Affairs of the Government of India. CNN's Chief International Anchor, Christian Amanpour.
Why don't you sit here and excuse me, let's get a mic. Okay, welcome. It's great to be here. And I would just also like to add my personal congratulations to those fantastic journalists who were honored and really respected today. Welcome to the First Lady of the United States and to everybody else. So as we know, this conference is built around the themes of, as we've just said, diversity and innovation and how to try to fix the big world issues that we are facing right now. I want to start by asking all of you the breaking news, if you like, because as if there weren't enough wars, destruction, and death happening in this region right now, it appears that we've all been surprised by what's happening in Syria. It appears that apparently no intelligence agency predicted this, and these rebels, whoever they are on their way potentially even to Damascus. We're hearing from the Wall Street Journal that the family of President Bashar Assad has left and has gone to Russia. I don't know, can I just start by asking you, Prime Minister, this is your region, yet another crisis. What do you expect will happen there? Do you think Assad can hang on?
First of all, thank you, Christian, for having me in this panel. I would like also to thank and welcome all our guests who participated with us here this year in Doha Forum. And I think we are having this forum this year in a very important and critical period in our region. Of course, from the situation in Gaza and then the expansion of this beyond Gaza. Well, first of all, I think that there are two factors when it comes to what's happening right now in Syria. The first factor was really anticipated because of what's happening in Gaza and what we've been actually trying to warn everyone around the world that this situation in Gaza is going to expand, is going to have its consequences on the entire region. And we have seen this is expanding gradually, whether it's in Lebanon or what's happening with the Red Sea. And so basically, I believe that anyone who eliminated the fact that Syria conflict was mistaken. This is really ignoring the situation in Gaza while we at that time, in Syria, while we had an opportunity in that time when the war over there has calmed down. Yet Assad didn't seize this opportunities to start engaging and restoring his relationship with his people, and we didn't see serious movement, whether it's on the return of the refugees or on reconciling with his own people. Of course, I believe that everyone around the world is very surprised with what's happening in the last few days, and not surprised with the move itself in the same manner as they are surprised how fast they are advancing and how fast they are progressing. this situation might evolve and becoming more and more dangerous, and our worry that this will bring us back to the old cycles of internal violence, the civil war, and this will really threaten the integrity, the territorial integrity of the state of Syria. And honestly, is going to damage and destroy what's left if there is any sense of urgency to start putting a political framework for what's happening over there and trying to address the issue from a political perspective in order to find a sustainable solution there.
Let me ask, I see you nodding, Foreign Minister about IDA. Again, this is a huge surprise, not just the speed, but the fact that it happened. Apparently, they've been planning for a while, and nobody kind of picked up on it. Do you think that this is a step towards a failed Syria state? And do you know who this Jawlani, the head of this group, is? What does he represent?
I have to say I'm really happy to be at the Doha Forum and in this panel. And I agree with the Prime Minister. We work closely with Qatar on many of these issues, and we have both been warning that the conflicts in the Middle East would spread. So when you say surprised, maybe the exact way it was spreading, but the fact that it would continue to spread should not be any surprise. There's a direct link between the regional dynamics and the intra-regional dynamics here, because the weakening of Hezbollah, indirectly the weakening of some of the proxies of Iran, but also Russia being more engaged in has led to a power of sorts in Syria, which has been seized on by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and these groups, who are also, transforming themselves, or at least presenting themselves in a new light. And the fact that the Assad forces are not putting on more resistance might suggest something that could move to a failed state. And there has been many warnings, many attempts to say Syria is not over. It might be simmering. The humanitarian situation is terrible already, getting worse. Remember, people were fleeing from Lebanon into Syria. Now a lot of Syrians are again fleeing or moving around in Syria, forced to be on the move. And the calls for a political settlement are more important than ever. But there have been too many groups in Syria, including the leadership, who have that they're time for really to call for dialogue, for a political settlement, and to try to stop this before it really goes totally down the drain. Mm-hmm. And it just illustrates such an important point. The conflicts in the region are intertwined, but they're also intertwined with conflicts in other regions, because there is not a separate European, Middle Eastern or Asian theater. They are increasingly connected to each other as well.
Which is a great way for me to ask you, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, sitting there in India, and this is not necessarily your region, but what's happening here, how does it affect you? What do you see happening in Syria? And more to the point, on the topic of this conference, how does one innovate with dialogue out of, let's just take the Syria situation right now. We can hang the Iran off that, but Syria.
Well, let me go back to your first question. Is it a surprise? The answer is yes. I would also agree with Sheikh Mohammed in the sense that the region was in such prolonged ferment that surprises will occur when this goes on for so long. Yes, we are to some distance away, but let me just put that in some perspective. We still have about 500,000 Indians who live in Mediterranean countries. We have a trade of about $80 billion with the Mediterranean. Now that's the Mediterranean. If I'm looking at the Gulf, we have 10 million Indians here and maybe about $180 billion of trade. Now, why do I mention that? Because I think what's happening in Syria, what's happening in the larger region, what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon, and the combination of all of this, there is a larger regional instability which is actually growing month on month. It is impacting, as a country on that side of Asia, we are feeling the impact of this. I mean, we're feeling it in shipping costs, we're feeling it in trade disruptions, we could see it in radicalization. I mean, so today, instability anywhere actually is a source of concern. There's no region you can say that's far away and it doesn't matter to me anymore. And by the way, this region is not so far away. And our interests are there, as I spelled out.
Prime Minister, the Biden administration, who you've been working for, is in its last days. Everybody here, everybody around the world, leaders are waiting to see what a new Trump administration means for the major issues around the world. So for here, you have been sort of the linchpin, Qatar, in the negotiations, certainly historically and currently, regarding Israel and Gaza and hostage release and ceasefire. It's got nowhere, but we understand it's restarted. What can you tell me about the state of a possible ceasefire right now and the impact of the Trump administration on the region?
I think first, when we look at the current state of the negotiations, it's been through ups and downs since the start of the war, and all of us, we have seen when November 23, the deal was concluded to release the first batch of hostages, around 109 Israelis plus 15 foreigners, in exchange of 250 Palestinian prisoners. And since that time, we've been back and forth within the same process, within the same framework that we are discussing until today. We have seen moments in time throughout the negotiations where, unfortunately, the process itself being exploited for political reason from one party or another, and a lot of scrutiny that we've been through because of some parties trying to score some political points. Now, especially in the last days of just before the elections in the United States, we have seen that the momentum in the negotiation became very much in declination, and we didn't sense a real willingness to reach a closure for what's happening over there. And that's when, similar to the step that we took back in April, until we see it will go and there is a possibility for a momentum to rebuild.
Is there now?
We have sensed, yes, actually, we have sensed after the election that the momentum is coming back. And now, when it comes to any differences between the previous administration or President Biden's current administration, the outgoing one and the incoming one, of course, there will be some differences in the themes and the approach that and the way they are approaching things, but we didn't see or recognize any disagreement on the goal itself to end the war, and that's basically was very important for us to understand especially after the election, because whether we like it or not, it has an impact on the decisions and what's happening on the ground. And it was the contrary. We have seen a lot of encouragement from the incoming administration in order to achieve a deal even before the president come to the office. And that's actually made us trying to move things back and trying to put it back on track. And we've been engaging in the past couple of weeks. Now, in terms of where we are, Christina, that this matter is affecting a lot, whether it's affecting the people in Gaza and the suffering that they are suffering, or even affecting the families in Israel, the families of the hostages. And unfortunately, given the way it's been managed throughout the year and everything being put out in the public domain, raising the hope for those innocent people has been counterproductive, because every time we got frustrated with the disappointments that we've been through in that. So we are trying as much as possible right now to protect the process in order to make sure that we can achieve a meaningful results. What we hope and what we expect, we hope to get things done as soon as possible. We hope that the willingness of the parties to engage in a good faith continues in the same manner. And if you look at the gaps in the disagreements, they are not something substantial that really affect the agreement. It's all about the main questions. Is there a willingness to end the war? Yes or no? Is there a willingness to have an exchange deal? Yes or no? Those are two very simple questions with very simple answers. If the answers are yes on both questions, then we have a deal.
Okay, so from your perspective in Europe, one of the main issues is what will be the political, and I assume from your perspective too, Prime Minister Al-Thani, what is the political decision for Gaza afterwards? As you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu has not laid down any political plan for post-war in Gaza. The allies, Saudi Arabia, the United States, Qatar, everybody says it must be also a Palestinian state and a withdrawal of Israel. Your country is from Gaza. Your country is one of those who's already recognized a Palestinian state. You were behind the Oslo Accords, so you have a really central role. Where do you think this is going politically?
That's the essential question. And I want to commend the excellent work of Sheikh Mohammed himself and his deputies and wonderful diplomats in working towards a ceasefire. But we also work together with a group of OIC and Arab League foreign ministers, including the Prime Minister, His Highness Faisal Al-Farhan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, others. And we connected that to a broader group of European countries, and we now have established a global alliance for implementing the two-state solution. And what convinced us to join this initiative, which is very much an Arab-owned initiative, but now becoming a much more global initiative, is that we need to think about the immediate, but we also need to think about the long term, because you can't do either one or the other. Without the immediate, you will not get to the long term. Reflecting on the long term, you might not get to the immediate solution. And this comes back to with Gaza afterwards. It must move towards a Palestinian state. We need a two-state solution, but not a three-state solution. We want an integrated Palestine, compromising, the West Bank, and Gaza, the relevant parts of Jerusalem, as was envisaged in the Oslo Accords. And the drama, the horror is so deep now that we cannot go back to 6th of October last year. That was not a stable, lasting situation. It was like a minefield. People might have not stepped on the mine, but, it was about to explode. It did explode. And here comes to your question about the incoming U.S. administration, because President-elect Trump was very vested in the Abraham Accords. Mm-hmm. I think the message now from this region is that is perfectly doable. There might actually be a major deal, but it has to happen with Palestine. And I think as long, and this is also what the group that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Norway, the European Union, others are forming now, is a very collective message that this is the time to think big, to think political solution, to think that peace for Israel, peace for Palestine, regional peace is connected. Because all these different conflicts, they are not the same. It's not one conflict, but there is a root conflict that connects to all of them, which is the absence of a solution to the Palestinian question. And that has been the driver of Norway's and my own foreign policy over this last year, to really see that today it cannot be just a Western country or two to come in to fix it. It has to be embedded seriously in this region. And we have to make sure that also Israel becomes a country not only in the region, but of the region connected to its in peace. And that can only happen with a Palestinian state. And honestly, it might sound naive, but I think it's actually hard politics. There is no alternative, so we have to move forward. We must dare to think outside the box.
Yes, I'm going to come back to that because certain members of the incoming US administration who've been nominated to work on this have suggested alternatives, including annexation and the rest. So I'll get back to that in a second. But to you, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, it is said that certainly we know Prime Minister Modi had a very close relationship with President Trump in his first term. We know that the Biden administration also, in fact, they were trying to hopefully drive a wedge or attract you from China and into the US sphere more. But President-elect Trump...
We were trying to attract them into the Indian sphere.
Yeah, okay. I don't know how it worked out, but right now you've got a whole threat of tariffs in the whole region and all the rest of it. President-elect Trump has also threatened BRICS, of which you are a member, with 100% tariffs if this and that. What do you expect for India and for your economy and your relationship with the United States and regional implications as well from that kind of message already from President Trump-elect?
We had a good relationship, a very solid relationship with the first Trump administration. Yes, there were some issues, mostly trade-related issues, but there were a whole lot of issues on which actually President Trump was very international. He was very forward-leaning. And I remind people that it was actually under Trump that the Quad was restarted. So if you look at the Indo-Pacific today, I mean, certainly President Biden built on it. But if you look at the Indo-Pacific today, in fact, it's an area where the United States made new commitments, as indeed did all of us. So I would say, from our perspective, quite honestly, I mean, there's a certain personal relationship between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. I would say in terms of politics, we don't really have divisive issues in terms of our political outlook. As two countries, by and large, I think our convergences way outstrip any differences we have. Where the BRICS remark was concerned, I think, I'm not exactly sure what was the trigger for it. But we've always said that, look, India has never been for de-dollarization. Right now, there is no proposal to have a BRICS currency. So I'm not quite sure what is the basis for.
He said if you stop pegging it to the dollar, but there wasn't a threat to do that, was it?
Well, the BRICS do discuss financial transactions. But certainly where India, I mean, BRICS doesn't, each country doesn't have an identical position on this. But where India is concerned, certainly, I mean, look, the United States is our largest trade partner. And we have no interest in weakening the dollar at all. But I just want to make one remark come back to the Middle East. The core issue undoubtedly is Palestine and Israel's relationship. How do they reach a modus vivendi? There's a larger issue side by side, which is the widening of this conflict, which is also a major concern. And, today we have, I don't want to say we normalized it, but the fact is 2 years ago, the prospect of Israel and Iran actually firing at each other would have been appalling. It's something which we couldn't have even contemplated. And yet it's happened. If you look at what's happening in the Red Sea and the impact for shipping in Asia, it's huge. So I think, there are different sort of challenges, layers of them. But just like the journalists who sat on these chairs before us told us, look, it's a tough world, very difficult, but we journalists have to do our job. Yeah. I think similarly, diplomats of the world have to tell themselves, it's a messy world, it's terrible, there are conflicts, but therefore there's all the more reason for diplomats of the world to step forward. And that era, which we saw in the 60s and 70s, which is either the Security Council managed it, or a few countries, mostly the major powers did it. I think that era is behind us. Yep. I think all of us in different ways need to step forward. So, for example, what Qatar is doing, there are so many conflicts. I mean, we are trying to do something in Ukraine. We see Myanmar as almost a kind of a forgotten conflict, where there's an approach like, let's not invite them and the problem will solve itself. So I think there is a greater case for more vigorous diplomacy, for more innovative diplomacy, for a more participative diplomacy, and I think more countries need to have the boldness to bite that bullet.
Let me just ask you, Prime Minister Al-Thani, you just told Time magazine, to Foreign Minister's point, the Middle East is unfortunately dancing on the edge. In terms of your historic role in negotiations, as you know, some powerful Republicans in Washington are threatening to pressure your government to cut ties with Hamas officials. How do you respond to that kind of pressure, and do you think it'll increase?
Well, with all the respect, for any other country's politician demands on Qatar on certain policies, not all of them also understand where Qatar stands and what its position. And unfortunately, even some politicians, they have no idea where Qatar is located. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but it's because it is the reality, when it comes, for example, when, talking about Iran, or talking about our relation, or the office, when Taliban office opened here, or when Hamas office opened here in Doha. It's basically this, this kind of fabric, it's the fabric of our region that we are living in. Most of the challenges that we are living in today, it's happening between state actor and non-state actors.
Yep.
And those non-state actors becoming like a major player, a major factor in the instability of that region. So who's going to engage with them? Do we have, if we would reflect just on 30, 40 years ago in that region, any of the conflicts that happened in the region being resolved in the battlefield and end them? Any of those situations being de-escalated or contained without having these lines of communication? All of them. Now, question here, not Qatar is talking to everyone and trying to engage with everyone. Who will be the alternative? It's the region around me is stable to ensure also my stability and my national security. And in order to ensure this stability, I need to engage with every party. I need to get the conflict to be resolved in a peaceful manner, and I need to ensure a better prospects for the region. And as I just mentioned in an interview with Yelda a couple of days ago, that if we are doing something wrong, let them identify what we've been doing wrong, because we've been doing everything with full transparency. When we have contacts or offices here, this wasn't done in the dark and it just popped up in one day. It was a result of discussions, negotiations, agreements. The use of that office wasn't just an anticipation of an event like 7th of October. And it helped in that event to secure the release. It brokered a lot of ceasefires before. It prevented a lot of wars from happening and erupting. It stabilized the situation. Now, something went wrong and resulted with the 7th of October. It's not because that they have an office exist in Doha and that's what triggered. There are a lot of other factors, but in ignoring the other factors that triggered and caused all this, and just focusing on one element, which honestly it's cosmetic element. I mean, a political office, political representation that represent a communication channel, what kind of empowerment does it have? except being a communication channel that serving this purpose. So the US administration, of course, they understand this very well. We've been doing this in full coordination and full openness with them. There are politicians, unfortunately, maybe they don't have the background about it. Once we engage with them, explain for them, they totally understand it and they totally get it. The ones whom we didn't have the chance to engage with or to explain that position, maybe this is should be a liability on us to engage. But in an overall, to sum it up, Qatar is a platform to convene between the different parties. Is a platform where we arrange for everyone to bring them to the table, but and to make sure that they are keep engaging between each other. But also we are not expected to enforce solutions or to impose on them any kind of solution if the willingness is lacking.
Okay. I want to ask you, Foreign Minister, one last question on this topic. Veteran Norwegian diplomat, as you know, Tor Wennesland, is stepping down as the UN Middle East envoy. And he told the New York Times, politics failed, diplomacy failed, the international community failed, and the parties failed. Failed to bring about the permanent solution to the crisis that really affects this whole region and so much of the world. And I just want to ask you, because again, the incoming Trump administration appointees, let's say Mike Huckabee, who's being appointed as the ambassador, said this week that of course it's possible that the US would back the Israeli government were it to try to annex the occupied West Bank. I'm sure all of you have ideas about that, but where do you think that would lead? And do you think that's really something that the US would accept? Does Europe agree? Do you have any power to disagree? What do you make of that?
First, I think we should relate to the Trump administration for real when it's actually in office and when they are actually presenting real policies from the position of power. So not to preempt that too much by commenting directly on his comments. But I did say, and I will maintain that, we will not be able to start solving the intricate set of problems in this region without dealing with the solution to Palestine. And the solution is not to perpetuate the occupation and make it into annexation. And this has also been very firmly put out by the International Court of Justice, which is everybody's court. It is the highest UN court and very clear on the status of occupation as illegal. And I think we have to take that as a starting point as we move forward. And I do also think, as I said earlier, that there are some opportunities in working on the Abraham Accords approach, given the solid message that can happen, but Palestine is part of it. But I very much wanted to underline what was said by the Prime Minister. Norway has a long tradition of peace mediation and dialogue facilitation. And we also very much share that vision that in order to get things done, you need to speak to the people that matters, even if those are people with blood on their hands and people you don't necessarily approve of. And speaking is not approving, speaking is not endorsement, speaking is necessary in order to facilitate the dialogue with the people that can actually change things. So here, Qatar and Norway has very much made the same experience. And a part of that experience is that many of the key countries actually accept and approve that has to be done. Even at times, people who publicly say you shouldn't speak to this or that person or country or group will actually be very interested in what we actually hear when we speak to them. And that makes us quite confident in that is a role that countries like us have to play, which is also why we work not only on the Middle East, but also on Ukraine and Venezuela. And we worked for years on Afghanistan with that similar approach. I think that's necessary. And I think when a new administration is in place and looks at the whole picture in its totality, I think they will form a more holistic policy on this, and I very much look forward that we all can engage with them when they are there. I see opportunities, I see challenges, but I also see opportunities, and I think that there are an opportunity here for what actually could become the deal of the century. I mean, this could happen here, but it requires that some of these insights from the region are brought into the.
I mean, as you remember, President Trump did recognize Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights, so it's not without precedent. But anyway, I hear what you're saying. Let's wait till they get into office. Foreign Minister Jaishankar, I want to ask you and ask all of you in a moment, the major war roiling Europe. So you get a lot of cheap oil still from Russia, I believe. Cheap
I get oil, yes.
Huh?
I get oil, yes.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
not necessarily cheap.
But it's
If you
Russian.
have a better deal, I'm willing to look
But
at
it's
it.
Russian, and it's a good deal for you, despite sanctions and all the rest of it. It has been said that Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, etc., are sort of forming or have formed an axis of anti-Americanism, anti-Westernism. And I want to know, does India have a role to play, or what do you believe will be the momentum on this Russia invasion of Ukraine and the resolution? I know the Foreign Minister Lavrov is going to speak. What do you think is going to happen, particularly with the Trump administration, who I know they're not in office, but they have very, very clearly telegraphed that they don't want to keep helping Ukraine militarily?
Two comments. One, regarding the conflict, the war itself. You know, we have always held to the view that this war is not going to be solved on the battlefield. That at the end of the day, people are going to return to some kind of negotiating table, the sooner the better. And our effort has been to facilitate that to the extent possible. Now, to be honest with you, that's not always been the most popular thing, at least in some parts of the world. But I do think today the general sort of the needle is moving more towards the reality of a negotiation than the continuation of the war. We are trying to do, you know, the bit I told you about why it's important for diplomacy to come forward.
Yeah.
Now we are really putting, in a way, our aircraft, our legs where our mouth is. We are actually doing, you know, going to Moscow, talking to President Putin, going to Kiev, engaging President Zelensky, meeting them in other places, trying to see if we can encourage, you know, find common threads which can be picked up at some point of time when the circumstances are right for it to be developed. We're not attempting a peace plan. We're not doing a mediation in that sense. We are doing multiple conversations and very transparent about telling each party, saying, look, at the end of the conversation, this is what we're going to tell the other party. We think that's, at this point of time, the most useful country diplomatically. We also believe in this, that we articulate the sentiments and the interests of the global south, 125 other countries who have found their fuel costs, their food costs, their inflation, their fertilizer costs impacted by this war. So there is a constituency out there which says, please do this, please, you know, carry on with this. And quite honestly, in the last few weeks and months, I've even seen this sentiment expressed by European leaders, major European leaders, who are actually telling us, please keep engaging Russia and engaging Ukraine. We welcome that. So we do think that things are moving somewhere in that direction. Your second point about, you know, is there such an axis? Look, perhaps in your world, it sounds very effective and dramatic to sort of make this this sort of sweeping assertion.
I didn't make it up.
Yeah,
They did.
No, but in my world, that's not the reality. You know, every country has its interests. They agree some, they disagree some, they work some. Sometimes the same countries work in different combinations in different issues. The reality is much more complicated, much more granular. And I caution people saying, don't go for this very sweeping generalities, because they become self-fulfilling if you actually accept them. I don't accept that. I do think each one of these is a nation with some history, with some certain self-regard, and each one of them is in it for themselves.
Yeah. Yes, I was coming to you on this because I think there'll be a lot more pressure from the Trump administration on Europe to take charge of their own security more. And the idea of giving weapons to Ukraine was, okay, maybe they thought they could help them win, but they never gave enough to help them win. But apparently not even enough to put them in a sort of co-equal place at the bargaining table. So how do you see an end to this diplomatically?
Well, actually, I think many were late, but we're giving much more now. We're also loosening restrictions for using advanced missiles into Russian territory, for instance, and several European countries, including my own, have over the last weeks actually stepped up quite a bit, both the quantity and quality of the contributions, because, of course, at the end of the day, somebody have to talk, but it has to be a just peace, not just peace. It has to be something that can create a post-war order in Europe, post-Ukraine war order, which we can all live with, and which does not reinforce that you can change borders by military means and that you can try to undermine other governments. And remember, there are some principles out there, and they are being violated big time. And when the Second World War ended, we got the UN Charter, we got some key principles of relations between states, one of them being the number one rule is, thou shalt not invade and occupy other countries, whereas self-defense is legal. We also created rules for how war should be fought, the Geneva Conventions, international humanitarian law, and the Human Rights Charter. And when I criticize Russia, it's not because I happen to side with Ukraine, it's because they broke the fundamental principle in relations between states, and that shall not happen. And when I criticize Israel in Gaza, massively overstepping the rules of warfare, meaning the distinction and proportionality principle in international law. And sometimes we actually have to take a principled approach. And the problem now is that we have one part of the world who is highlighting correctly Russia's violations of Ukraine's sovereignty, but being wobbly on Gaza. And then you have another part of the world who are correctly criticizing Israel in Gaza, but rather wobbly on the principles that have been violated in Ukraine. And I proudly say that I stand up for the principles in both cases. And I think we are much better off, particularly countries who are not the biggest ones on the planet, if we try to believe in the principles we agreed. And if we don't like them, we should change them collectively, not just keep ignoring them, because the outcome of that collective ignorance of the principles when they are not so favorable to your own friends and positions is that in the end there will be no principles left, and we will all live in a much more dangerous world. So I think really I will demand behavior of Russia in Ukraine, and I will demand compliance with international humanitarian law in Gaza.
Really interesting. And finally to you, Prime Minister Al-Thani, we've got a minute and 20 seconds left. We've talked about a lot of threats. We've talked about the principles of this forum. How does one innovate and dialogue one's way out of, for instance, climate? We haven't talked about that, and I think that's a huge issue here.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Climate. We haven't talked about climate. What is another big threat that you're, that's on your plate right now?
Well, actually, look, from our perspective, when you look at the human needs pyramid, security is like the foundation of that pyramid. And basically, when you lack security, it means that everything on top of it will be considered as a secondary threat. And this is the nature of the human being. Today, in the Middle East, in our region, the main threat that we have is a security threat that we didn't figure it out yet. When we have all these conflicts, instead of being contained, being spreading out, then all other issues which are very highly concerning for us as governments are not really been thought of because of the foundation itself that's not being addressed. Now, when it comes to trying to think about issues and crises in more an innovative manner, I believe that the approach that we are trying to take here as a state of Qatar is really when we look at any issue or any crisis around us from a security perspective, we are trying to break down this crisis and trying to isolate at least, different verticals from each other and trying to address whatever we see as a quick win and then build on it from there. That will help in building momentum. This is basically the approach that we are trying to adopt. But when it comes to other issues like collaborative approach on climate, on food security, on issues that are required for our people and for our people prosperity, we believe that regional platforms now becoming more and more effective, more and more relevant to the kind of dialogue. For example, in the DC for the main facilitator for in that I believe that what we have accomplished respect has been very, very important and very significant. Just to close, I know I see I see the clock. Just for as a matter to close with what my colleagues just mentioned on the situation in the region and Gaza and on the wider situation when it comes to Russia, Ukraine. Christian, the most important thing that we go back to the first principles and what His Excellency just mentioned. Now, when we are trying to apply international law, they need to be applied equally to everyone and to each and every conflict. Unfortunately, what we have seen, especially from the lens of the people of this region, that a lot of countries that's considered, the leading countries in international law, leading countries in human rights law, they are just turning a blind eye from what's happening in the region and, looking at what's happening with Ukraine only from that lens, while in the region, no, it's different. We have other reasons. There are historical dimensions to this. Yes, we know there are historical dimensions to this, but these historical dimensions can never give the license to kill innocent people like this. Thank you.
Prime Ministers, Foreign Ministers, thank you so much indeed. Really interesting.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you to all your distinguished panelists for this wonderful opening session. A breath of fresh air to have such
President CII, Mr. Sanjay Puri, Director General, Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, Excellencies, dear friends. I'm very pleased today to address the CII Partnership Summit 2024 on the theme of India and the world. This gathering also appropriately focuses on partnerships in progress. Allow me to share my views on this subject. Even otherwise, an economy like India that has risen to the 5th position globally and advancing further needs more significant partnerships. Our stakes in the world are more, the responsibilities are greater, and indeed, the expectations too are higher. But the case for international partnerships are strengthened by the state of the global economy currently as well. At a time when there is so much volatility and uncertainty, India can certainly be a stabilizing factor. We can add as well to the engines of growth and make our due contributions to the progress of technology. The fact is that the world faces complex challenges
at multiple levels, which span a range of domains and requirements. At one end are those of more diversified manufacturing and improved logistics. On the other hand, we are entering an era of AI and of EV, of space and drones, of green hydrogen and ammonia, of clean and green technologies, and we can go on. So, whether it is the orthodox demands or those of critical and emerging technologies, a common factor is that of human resources. The knowledge economy puts a premium on innovation and creativity that in turn demand more talent and skills. And this arises as much of the world also contemplates a demographic crisis. The short point is that the very economic landscape that we are looking at is in the midst of a deep transformation. Responding effectively to that cannot just be a national endeavor, it needs more partnerships. Interestingly, side by side, there is also a strategic transformation underway. For a decade now, we have witnessed a steadily building backlash against the current model of globalization. Many societies feel that their capacities, their national capacities have been hollowed out and that their quality of life is actually stagnating. There is a realization as well that global rules have been gamed and that the current structure cannot come up with effective remedies. The COVID experience has made the world even more insecure because we all stood starkly exposed to the degrees of our external dependence and vulnerability and to leveraging. On top of this, economic rebalancing began to acquire strategic connotations. Surpluses were now translated into influence, if not dominance. The US-China friction has assumed a salience that could not have been envisaged just a few years ago. The Ukraine conflict has created its own ripples, reflected in food, fuel, and fertilizer insecurities. The global south is also feeling the brunt of inflation, of debt, of currency shortages, and of trade volatility. In short, the world looks a very tough place. And tough situations call for more friends and more partners. Now, the advent of the second Trump administration, which Mr. Banerjee also referred to, is obviously a major consideration in business circles, and I'm not surprised you spent some time debating it. Obviously, the only safe prediction is one of a degree of unpredictability. Different countries have had their own experiences from the first administration and would presumably draw from that to approach the second. I can state with confidence that the strategic convergences with the United States for India have only grown deeper with time. They have created a larger environment in which more collaborative possibilities can be explored today. Naturally, between two major economies, there will always be some give and take. When we look at economic or technology domains, the case for trusted and reliable partnerships have actually increased in recent years. So a lot of what lies ahead would be in fashioning terms of engagement that are perceived and recognized to be mutually beneficial. And in that regard, the more that India can bring to the table, the stronger will be our appeal. Some thoughts about the neighborhood would also be appropriate given these changes that we have seen in recent times. The reality on the ground is that our economies and societies are closer linked than ever before. During periods of stress, it could be COVID, the Ukraine aftermath, or financial difficulties, we have actually stood together to our collective benefit. At times, currents of politics may seek to distance or even to disrupt. Obviously, challenges like terrorism cannot be overlooked. But the truth is that otherwise, departures from natural collaboration do have a cost. The viability is also a related issue. On the whole, that realization, I believe, is now more deeply felt. So, the real issue in progressing partnerships is actually about building better at home. The greater our capabilities, the broader our capacities, the more innovative our talent, the wider our skills, the more attractive we are as a partner. As this conclave would recognize clearly, the crucial challenge today is to build our manufacturing to a scale and efficiency that makes us a credible partner abroad. On its part, the government has facilitated that process enormously by addressing long-standing challenges in respect of infrastructure and logistics. Today, the pace at which rail and road or ports and airports are being built is appreciated even beyond our borders. Indeed, the combination of Gati Shakti, making it easier to do business, and enhancing the ease of living have had a synergetic impact on our business climate. In its third term, the early notable decisions of the Modi government include the establishment of 12 new industrial nodes, doubling down on infrastructure projects, and a focus on skill and talent promotion that would propel this growth. Our expectation is that Indian businesses would step forward more vigorously in this journey towards Viksit Bharat. Let us recognize that by making India into a manufacturing power, we emerge as reliable partners to create resilient supply chains. Moreover, only when there is a well-established industrial culture that we can really become a generator of technology. These twin consequences can actually make some difference to de-risking a fragile and anxious global economy. The digital era intensifies the compulsions to forge trusted partnerships. Data, it is now evident, is actually much bigger than just a new oil. The AI revolution is going to transform the way we live, the way we work, perhaps even the way we think. This has serious consequences across the board, including, understandably, how to develop the requisite capacities. Major powers also lead in this regard, but many others have their own contribution to make. Different economies have developed their niche capabilities that fit into a larger whole. If India is to realize its ambitious national prospects, it cannot be left out of this game. On the one hand, this means greater data awareness and sensitivity. On the other, it mandates investments in and development of related capabilities. The semiconductor domain is one such example. Electric mobility is equally another. Inorganic endeavors to rapidly grow will require collaboration with trusted partners. And that is exactly what we see as the beginnings underway. The domains are also such that there has to be an understanding of it beyond just business. Like it or not, we are increasingly in an era of leveraging, if not of weaponization. Policymakers, therefore, have to place national security filters when it comes to economic decisions, including those of investment. This is the trend the world over, and we would ignore it in this country at our peril. Partnerships are also increasingly cognizant of demographic challenges. The mismatch between the demands for skills and its availability is actually going to increase even more sharply. We in India have noted that mobility has steadily emerged on the global agenda as an area of cooperation. Societies that were historically resistant are now moving to have a second look. Many realize that the assured availability of talent is indeed the X factor in the knowledge economy. Obviously, this is a complex issue because it has accompanying social and even political implications. Where India is concerned, it is imperative to prepare for a global workplace. In fact, this will happen with or without us. It is better that we consciously shape it to our advantage. If this is combined with our own manufacturing and service aspirations, the case for training our talent and skills become even more powerful. There are many dimensions to this challenge. The scale of demand is such that industry must do its fair share by offering training, internships, and other opportunities. For the global level, it is essential we also expand exposure in India to foreign languages and to foreign cultures. Both preparation and access to workplace can be facilitated through understandings between governments. These are today, in fact, key goals for Indian diplomacy. There is a flip side as well that needs to be appreciated. We are seeing a trend in the proliferation of global capability centers in our country. In many ways, they have an efficiency and a sensitivity which addresses contemporary needs. Insourcing from India may well become the new mantra. In any conversation, FTAs inevitably arise as a possible avenue of partnership. There is much truth in that, but equally some grounds for caution. A low per capita income country with small producers will have a natural reticence about excessive external exposure. This is all the more so if that exposure is also to unfair, subsidized, and large-scale competition. The nature of commerce and supply chains in the world is such today that orthodox precautions are not always adequate. Yet, it would be unwise to forego opportunities and to limit access. The working principle, therefore, has to be one of proceeding with caution. In recent years, we have progressed with the EFTA nations, with UAE, with Australia, and Mauritius. Some major agreements, I think all of you are aware, are under discussion. In a world under churn, such endeavors will naturally tend to occupy greater mind space. The world has also seen a greater interest in developing alternative and redundant connectivity. And I believe that has also been a subject of some discussion earlier in the day. The de-risking that is today at the heart of so many national policies also applies to logistics. There are, after all, so many factors of volatility that the fragility of connectivity needs to be credibly addressed. Even in the last few years, we have seen it threatened by conflicts, by extreme climate events, and by pandemics. Each one of them is a recurring phenomenon, and there could be other black swans out there. Moreover, the current structure of connectivity is itself a distortion that we have inherited from the colonial era. Many natural flows were disrupted by colonial regimes that were acting in their own interest. Restoring them is an intrinsic aspect of economic rebalancing. For a variety of historical and geographical reasons, India today occupies a crucial position. Our ability to forge more connectivity partnerships will certainly have a broader resonance. To the West, we are currently working on the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC, and the International North-South Transport Corridor, INSTC. To the East, work is underway on the India-Myanmar-Thailand Trilateral Highway, IMTT, as well as the Chennai-Vladivostok Corridor. When they are realized, do appreciate that the new pathways will actually open up from the Atlantic to the Pacific, traversing India in that process. Its significance is something that you will all obviously appreciate. Partnerships take different forms in different geographies. Our interactions with the developed world are largely through trade, through investment, technology flows, best practices, and mobility. With the global South, however, there is much more that we can do. Supporting development projects, sharing experiences, and increasing capacity building are some good examples. India today partners 78 nations in this regard. The actual cooperation is as per the priorities of the partner. For our businesses, they open up new markets, they support services, and they build networking. Grants and lines of credit under the IDEAS program have been an effective tool of diplomacy. We regard them as producing win-win situations across the global South. I should also add that within the Ministry of External Affairs, we have made 3 Ts, that is trade, tourism, and technology, as the benchmarks for evaluating performance. Our efforts are also reflected in initiatives to support SMEs abroad, as well as to facilitate investment inflows. A closer synergy between various arms of the government has actually been the hallmark of the Modi government. Friends, India is today steadily expanding its economic, political, diaspora, and cultural footprint in the world. Very often, it is our businesses and our talent who have led these endeavors. But whoever takes the initiative, our goal is to work as Team India abroad. We know that the world's image of India is shaped by actual experiences, be they individual or of corporates or of organizations. Partnerships abroad will only be as effective as forging those at home. And we must do so with even greater determination because the world economy is entering a turbulent era. Many nations are reverting to more nationalistic policies, while also asserting their cultural characteristics. The established globalization mantras are discredited, but yet to be replaced by new thinking. The anxieties of recent experiences has brought national security more prominently into our calculations. And technology itself is poised for a big jump with AI. This complex phenomenon, with some facets returning to the past, but others actually leaping into the future, will be a challenge for diplomacy and for business alike. In partnering together, we may get the best value for ourselves. I thank you for your attention.
शादी सीजन आ गया, तैयारी तो करनी पड़ेगी। ओह नो, मेरा फेवरेट सूट दाग कैसे रह गया? जिद्दी दाग के लिए डिटर्जेंट के साथ जस्ट ऐड